tactics. And so, there are some things I know a whole lot about, like the fundraising side, the marketing side. I often leverage the experience I've learned from other departments and agencies. So I'm excited to walk you through some of those things as well. So let's get started. The first thing I want to start with before we actually get into the true content of today's webinar is the idea of virtual fundraising. 6 months ago, now almost 7 months ago, the world basically stopped, and a lot of organizations had to seriously rethink about the ways that they fundraise online, the ways that they engage supporters. And for many, many organizations that I talked to in particular, especially those that were heavily funded by in-person events or heavily reliant on foot traffic to fund their initiatives, they were pretty much not really sure where to go or what to do. And so one of the things that I would often talk to them about is that if you're thinking about pivoting to virtual events or virtual fundraising, it's a concept that isn't really that new. And hopefully that provides a little bit of comfort as you start to think about the ways that you could engage donors online moving forward, not just through the pandemic and other types of, and what we're going through now, but ongoing. We're going to talk a lot about now, and we're also going to talk a lot about the future. So a couple things to think about. Digital participation has become really, really popular. In just the last 5 years, we've seen organizations really start to engage supporters in a much more digital and virtual capacity. We see a lot of organizations that do traditional fundraising events still have a virtual option wherever they might be. And that's such a great opportunity to do something that we talk a lot about, which is extend your organization's reach beyond its geographical and financial limitations. What do I mean by that? When you host an event and you're asking people to buy tickets, register, attend, participate, whatever it might be, you actually automatically exclude 2/3 of potentially your supporter base, those that aren't located close enough to attend your event, and those who potentially can't afford to participate. And so you really limit the ways that you can get people involved. And that's why virtual fundraising is so powerful, because it completely breaks down those barriers and allows other people to get involved wherever they might be. We also know that virtual fundraising doesn't necessarily encounter the same resource limitations that in-person events do. Large-scale events or even smaller events, you have to deal with vendors and sponsors and locations and venues and all these things that take a lot of time, effort. Of course, they take money. Virtual fundraising, I think we often look at it as, something we can do on the side, but it presents the opportunity for a lot more profit, honestly, because the overhead is significantly less than an in-person event. And then finally, virtual fundraising can take shape in a whole lot of different ways. You don't have to have a virtual 5K or even a virtual gala. There are so many opportunities to talk about virtual fundraising and to get people involved in a digital capacity. So we're going to talk a whole lot about this in particular a little bit later in the presentation. So let's get started into the actual content. That was our appetizer. So today we're going to talk about 4 very specific strategies to create a standout virtual fundraising campaign. You'll notice that this isn't titled virtual events. We're going to talk a lot about virtual events, but we're also going to talk about virtual campaigns, how they're different, how they're similar, and how to use them in conjunction with one another. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make your campaign really stand out from the crowd. A lot of organizations are doing virtual events and campaigns right now. That's not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. It means that organizations are figuring out ways to, engage supporters during a time where they really need their support. We're also going to talk about maximizing results. Oftentimes, we put out these events and campaigns, we kind of cross our fingers and, we're hoping that there's a lot of participation and engagement. We do whatever we can to try to drum that up, but there's some very specific things you can do that can really help you make the most out of your virtual event or campaign. We're going to talk about marketing too. I mentioned that, most of my experience is in fundraising. I have a little bit of experience in marketing, but I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of marketing teams and agencies, and they've given me a lot of best practices in how organizations of really any shape or size can market to their supporters better. I think sometimes we look at our organization as, okay, we're the fundraising arm. We're going to reach out to our supporters. That's our marketing, but there's actually a whole lot of things you can do that you might not be taking advantage of now. And then finally, we're going to do some post-campaign follow-up and use this moment as an opportunity to expand our sustainable revenue streams. It sounds cliche, but we can learn from this moment. And the organizations that relied on things like virtual fundraising and recurring giving are the ones that are pretty comfortable right now. And that's because they had diversified revenue streams that weren't overly reliant on one specific initiative or event or campaign. So we're going to talk about what that could look like for you moving into the future. And then finally, I've compiled some cool campaigns that I really like that I'm going to share with you all so that you can take a look at them and maybe get some inspiration for your own events. So first up, how to make your virtual campaign really stand out. We know that virtual events and initiatives are everywhere. A lot of organizations are doing them, some better than others. But what's most important is not necessarily how much better or more beautiful your event is than another organization's or whatever you're comparing yourself to. It's more about how do you design your event or campaign to connect with supporters. I was faced with a lot of questions, especially at the beginning of all this around April, May, where a lot of organizations were sort of afraid to ask for support from donors, considering the unemployment rate, and there are a lot of scared people out there. But we see, especially in times of need, that philanthropy really kicks up. And so when you're deciding about how to build a virtual campaign, or really any campaign, connecting with supporters is what really matters most. So first up, strategy is important, but it doesn't always mean creating a digital clone of your in-person event. This is actually a pretty common misconception, that if you had an in-person event that's been canceled or postponed indefinitely, and you want to now turn it into a virtual event, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just going to do a carbon copy of what you would have done in person. That is an option, but we're going to talk about some other ways to get supporters involved. So I alluded to this at the very beginning, virtual campaign versus virtual events. What's the difference? A virtual event is essentially a virtual carbon copy of an in-person event. This is where you're still selling tickets, selling registrations. Maybe you're doing some sort of participation where people can walk or run in their own communities and fundraise on your behalf. That's where you're still asking people to, quote unquote, attend your event, but it's happening virtually. A virtual campaign is a little bit different. There is potentially no registration or ticket purchasing function of a virtual campaign. Virtual campaigns are more peer-to-peer focused, where you're asking people to donate and fundraise on your behalf simply because you need their support and you're looking for help in certain areas to fund certain programs. So when we talk about virtual fundraising, it's good to think about the two paths you can take. Do you just do a virtual version of your in-person event, or do you do a virtual fundraising campaign that could potentially reach more people? We're actually going to talk about doing both simultaneously. So we talked a little bit about earlier on how virtual fundraising can help break down your geographical and financial limitations. And that's the benefit to having a virtual event with a virtual campaign in one. What I mean by that is if you were going to host a virtual gala, for example, or a virtual 5K, or something that requires people to register or virtually attend, think about doing a virtual option where people don't have to do that. They can just simply fundraise on your behalf. What this does is this helps people who normally wouldn't be able to attend your event now attend. I'll give you a real life example. Every year we do our conference out in Boston called the Classy Collaborative, which is an incredible experience for all the nonprofits that we get the chance to work with, and many that we don't. And typically we get about 1,500 attendees out in Boston. They got to get on a plane, they get a hotel room, all that stuff. So we made it digital this year, and we had about 9,500. And it really and we did it for free versus charging a fee. And so the idea is that if you've got, individuals who want to support you, by doing a virtual campaign versus just a virtual event, you potentially bring in a whole bunch of new supporters into the fold. This is also an opportunity to think critically and creatively about the type of campaign that you want to do. I mentioned that you don't have to do a virtual gala, or you could do a virtual gala and something a little bit more creative. You could do a video game tournament. You could do different giveaways for top fundraisers and top teams. Oftentimes, we have a term that we use in technology, which is called KTLO, which stands for Keep the Lights On. And so a KTLO campaign could be a campaign where you're telling your supporters how much you need their support and your help. We know a lot of organizations are facing financial uncertainty. So there's nothing wrong with having a direct appeal to your supporters saying, hey, without your support, we may not be here next year. And so it's all about thinking about how to do things a little bit differently and not being afraid to try new things. If there's any moment in time where that's perfectly okay, it's right now. I also want to talk a little bit about messaging. I found that in the experience that I've seen over the last 6 months, especially, and even before that, organizations that focus on honesty and impact of contributions are the ones that really see success. These are the ones that have a much easier time recruiting supporters and acquiring donors during times of uncertainty. First off, keep your mission front and center. Even if you're doing a virtual event, a gala, a 5K, a bowling tournament, whatever it is that you're thinking about doing, it's still about you. Organizations or supporters don't attend events simply because they want to put on nice clothes and walk the red carpet and take some pictures and, get a babysitter for their kids, maybe some of you. But what they really want to do is they want to support you. They want to know that they're making a difference, maybe in their community for smaller organizations, or for larger organizations, they want to feel like they're making an impact. So as you start to put out these events, focus on your mission, focus on your programs, make that the center of everything that you do. Remind your supporters why they were coming in the first place. If you've now pivoted from having an in-person fundraiser to a virtual fundraiser and you're worried that your supporters aren't going to participate now simply because they don't get to show up and, eat a catered meal or walk around a track, that's not necessarily the case. People attend these events because they care. And so if you remind them of that, I think you'll have a better time recruiting people to participate in these types of fundraisers. Something that I see a lot of smaller organizations actually do really, really well, which is help supporters understand the impact of a potential donation. Here's the key word in that bullet. It's potential. Donors are not donors until they give. Supporters are not supporters until they actually take some kind of action. We have to sell ourselves. We have to convince an individual, especially during times of economic uncertainty, to give us their money. And so one way to do that is really helpful is helping to explain or even graphically display the potential impact of even a small contribution. We're not really talking about restricted versus unrestricted funding. We're talking about how much $25 a month could do for your specific programs or your mission. Donors want to feel like they're doing something. They want to feel like they're making an impact regardless of the size of their gift. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about speed to launch. So this was really important early on in the virtual fundraising sort of explosion back in April. It's still really important today. Speed to launch matters. You want to go fast, and I'll explain why. One thing that we talk to a lot of organizations about on Classy, what you're looking at right now is a GIF of the Classy campaign builder, is you want to launch first, customize next. What does that mean? A lot of organizations suffer from what we call design paralysis, which means that their campaign or event lives in draft form for far too long. They're stressing about graphics and design and colors and font and text. Don't do that. You can do that later on as you go. The most important thing is that you get your campaign out into the world. The longer you wait, the more your supporters are wondering what you're doing. They may even not even be sure if you're still operating. And so it's super important to go quickly. So my biggest piece of advice when designing or putting out new campaigns or fundraisers is launch first, customize later. Put out a bare bones campaign, and as you go, you can incrementally make it more whatever style that you're looking for, but don't wait. The more time to market and steward supporters, the better. That's another reason why speed to launch is so critical. If you wait to launch a campaign, it gives you less time to do the things that make a campaign successful. Marketing to supporters, maybe doing soft launches, getting feedback from staff, volunteers, board members, etc. The things that you would typically do if you weren't, panicking about getting a campaign out there, you can do if you go quickly. A lot of times we're focused on testing versus doing. But in the for-profit world, we talk a lot about being first to ship, and you fix things later. And that's especially true with fundraising. So the second topic we're going to talk about is maximizing results. So once you've launched your virtual event or campaign, what are the actions that you're taking to ensure it's as successful as possible? This may be the one topic many of you are here to take a look at, which is, all right, I'm going to do a virtual event, or I'm going to do a virtual campaign, gala, 5K, peer-to-peer fundraising campaign, team fundraising event, whatever we're going to do. How do I make sure it's good? So that's what we're going to talk about next. So first off, let's say that you're going to do a virtual event, an event where you still want people to digitally attend your event and participate. There's actually a lot of these types of events right now, and they're really successful. Some of them have found new footing, and you might even see some of these organizations remain somewhat virtual as we move forward. So a couple things about how to design or create a virtual event that really feels like it's actually happening in person. Think about giving access to certain attendees while also engaging a virtual audience. So what I mean by that is, if you're doing a virtual event, you can still sell tickets to that event, but you have to give something in return for that. It could be access to a mobile auction. It could be a care package. It could be swag. It could be access to information. It could even be a shout out on a website or a social media platform. But if you're looking for people to continue to virtually attend, make sure that there's something in exchange, because while it's still virtual and potentially less expensive than a traditional event, we want to make them feel exclusive. Competitions, incentives, and shout outs go a long way. So if you've never done a fundraising competition where, most fundraiser, most donors, most dollars raised, et cetera, get certain prizes or milestones or shout outs, you should definitely think about doing now. Competitions are a really natural way to fuel urgency, and people just like it. It's fun and exciting to compete against one another. The one thing I'll say about competitions is that you don't necessarily have to give out prizes and actual incentives. I think that's a common misconception, that every supporter wants a mug or a t-shirt. Not necessarily true. We live in a world now where we overshare everything. And so one of the things that supporters really like is they like everybody else to know that they did a good deed, they did a good thing. So shouting out people on Facebook, or mentioning them on Instagram or Instagram stories, or putting them on Twitter or on your website is a great way to sort of shout somebody out. It makes them feel good and it keeps them coming back. Don't be afraid to do something different. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but this is the time to get creative. So if your event doesn't typically have a mobile bidding option, or you haven't done something like a Twitch stream, which is for video game streaming, or you haven't done something like YouTube Live or text to donate, now is the time. We're in a position right now where you can really get creative and try new things that maybe you wouldn't normally do. For example, if you've done the same fundraising gala for 15 years and now you're going virtual, try something new. This is the opportunity to give that a shot. And you may end up finding that it becomes a staple moving forward. And finally, over-communicate with supporters. This is not the time to build a set it and forget it event. This is the moment to over-communicate. Sending emails, sending text messages, using the activity wall, which is sort of a digital hub on the Classy platform where you can comment and thank donors in real time. Shout them out on social media. This is the time to over-engage. You really want to make people feel like they're doing something special. We call this sort of a golden handcuff rule. If you get a new supporter during a pandemic, you better go above and beyond to make sure that they feel appreciated, because that's a big deal. And the more that you do that, even in a digital capacity, the higher likelihood they are to become a lifetime supporter and supporting you once things get back to normal. Now, we talked a little bit about virtual events. Now we want to talk about virtual campaigns and the importance of engaging and energizing your supporter audience. So we talked about speed to launch, and this may seem like the opposite of that, but it isn't. When we talk about strategy, it shouldn't be sacrificed for urgency. Here's what I mean by that. We want you to launch campaigns quickly. We know how important it is to get a campaign out there, but it doesn't mean it should be done completely haphazardly. If you're going to do a virtual campaign or a fundraising campaign of any kind, if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, you probably make sure that your campaign has a specific goal, a start and end date, milestones that you want to reach, engagement strategies, planning. Do those same things. Don't push those to the side simply because things seem a little bit more urgent. You still want to move quickly, but there are very simple things like, does your campaign have a fundraising goal, and why is that the goal, that are really important. Let your supporters know what you're accomplishing together. And the most important part of this is be as specific as you possibly can. A phrase like, you're helping us do great things, doesn't work. You want to be specific. You're helping us buy a new van, which allows us to transport cancer patients to their treatments every day for the next 3 months. You want to be as specific as you can with what even $1 will provide to your programs, and to your mission. This is really what makes supporters feel like they're making a difference, when they know that they have a real, true, tangible impact. General phrases like, we appreciate your support, or thank you for helping us during this time, just don't cut it. You really want to be as particular as you can. Encourage your fundraisers to get creative. So if you're the organization that's done peer-to-peer fundraising before, and we're going to talk about this later on, and maybe you've prescribed ways to get involved, now you can let them do whatever they want. Everybody's at home. We've got lots of time. And we're all stressed. There's a lot going on. Our kids are here. We don't really know, how to do things differently. And so let your fundraisers be creative. Do different things. We're coming up on holiday season, Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the other great things, end of year giving. Encourage your fundraisers to really get creative. And then my favorite line of this slide is to celebrate constantly. There's a lot of bad stuff happening right now, and there's a lot of bad news. In fact, it's nothing but bad news when you turn on the TV or go online. There is the perfect conduit for good news, and that's you. As nonprofit organizations working to better communities and better the world and accomplish some of the world's greatest challenges, you are the perfect conduit for success stories, for encouragement, for good news. And so don't lock yourself away. Don't become a victim to the bad news out there. Be the opposite. Share good news. Your supporters need it, and you're the perfect people to do that for them. And lastly, on this topic, launch campaigns that focus on flexibility and creativity. So on that point, virtual events and campaigns should emphasize options instead of prescribed passive support. Oftentimes, you may not realize it, but you're actually limiting your supporters without even realizing that you're doing so. What do I mean by that? Well, if you only give your supporters very specific ways to get involved, make a one-time donation, make a recurring donation, attend our event, join our newsletter, etc., you're really limiting how much they can support you. Let them do whatever they want. It may feel like you're losing control or letting control up, but what you're doing is you're giving flexibility and options to your supporters, and who knows what they're going to do with it. That being said, though, providing the right levels of guidance and encouragement, you can really give fundraisers the capability to go pretty much crazy and do a lot of great things for you. We've seen individual and team fundraisers raise tens of thousands of dollars, bring in hundreds of donors into the organization, all because they have the option to do so. The example on the right there, the Cancer Research Institute, they're doing a DIY fundraising campaign, and to help make sure that they're maximizing success, they give their fundraisers a toolkit that walks them through best practices on how to share on social media, how to write a fundraising email, how to thank donors, and how to potentially raise money, because your fundraisers, your supporters are not professional development staff. They are everybody else. So they need someone to show them and teach them how to fundraise successfully. And finally, the takeaway from a lot of these things is to leverage data. So if you're hosting virtual events and virtual campaigns, if you're doing different types of campaigns that you've never done before, different appeals, different initiatives, the data that you collect from those campaigns are going to be really important moving forward. How are people supporting you? Are you getting first-time donors during the pandemic? How are you treating them? We're going to spend some time at the end of this presentation talking about post-event campaign follow-up and the importance of that. All right. Number 3, best practices for marketing to your supporters. Marketing and outreach can sometimes feel like an afterthought. We spend time designing and building and putting out the campaign. We put it out on our website, we put it in our newsletter, we put it on Facebook and Twitter, and then we cross our fingers. But there's some really great things you can do that are relatively simple and inexpensive that can help you market your campaigns and events. First things first, you should be spending at least 50% time on creative. That means design, content, graphics, colors, actually building your campaign, and 50% time on traction. That means outreach and marketing. This is a great line I got from Community Boost Consulting, which is a marketing shop for nonprofits out here in San Diego, where we're based out of. Almost every failed campaign has good creative, beautiful campaigns, great initiative, but they don't have enough donors. That means that they spend too much time building and not enough time marketing. That's what we talked about at the beginning, why speed to launch is so important. So we picked 4 great marketing channels for virtual events and campaigns in particular. These 4 can really help you get your event or campaign off the ground. So first one is email marketing. A few best practices in email marketing that seem obvious, but good to remind you of. Segmentation is critical. What that means is you want to make sure that you're not blasting your entire supporter base with the same message to everybody. You want to segment your emails based on who exists in your supporter base and where they are. It could be by demographic. It could be by higher end donors, lower end donors, donors in one part of the country versus donors in the other, donors who come through peer-to-peer campaigns versus those that give to your main donation form. The more customized you can be in your segmentation, the higher likelihood that you're going to convert someone from opening an email to clicking through and making a contribution. Subject line still rules. It's been the rule for about 30 years at this point. Creative subject lines are really what engages people. So you can try different subject lines, test your subject lines. You don't have to be a marketing wizard to test how things work. Ask your staff, ask your volunteers, ask your board what they would click on, and try different things. Powerful imagery and video motivates people. Video right now is really, really big, especially if it's quick, 3-minute videos with subtitles. And the reason why we talk about that is because a lot of people are just scrolling through and they want to see a video. They don't necessarily want to click into it and watch it. They just kind of want to watch bits and pieces of it. So big images, powerful videos, make them brief, put on subtitles, they go a long way. Test sending text-only emails. This is something that a lot of organizations shy away from. They're used to sending beautiful, carefully curated newsletter style emails, but text emails or text-only emails, are more personal. They make it seem like you're reaching out to them individually. And so that's a great way to try something new and see what works for you. Clear CTAs, so make sure your calls to action are big, bright, and right in the middle. You can see in this tenement museum email to the right, the donate today is big, loud. This is mobile, so it's super easy to know how to actually take action. It's crazy how often we bury a call to action in just a hyperlinked text. Make sure it's big and easy to find. And don't hesitate to send more. Oversend. Like I mentioned, this is the time to over communicate. This is the opportunity to really not, hammer your donors and encounter donor fatigue, but it's a moment where you want to recognize that things are going on and you want to be clear in your communication. There's just a lot of uncertainty right now, so if you can add some certainty, it helps quite a bit. Second thing we're talking about is social media marketing. Some organizations do this really well, and some it's a relatively new concept. And so we're going to talk about some of the best practices that we've seen that are actually pretty simple to do. First one is volume over perfection. I cannot stress this enough, and there's a reason why it's the first thing on this list. Post more, not better. And this has been a consistent theme throughout today's presentation. You want to do more. It kind of blows my mind some cases where I go to a nonprofit's Facebook page or Twitter page and I see their last post was 5 days ago. There's nothing that screams complacency like not posting something, an update, sharing what a donor story is, sharing an article, something that helps people know that you're still there. And if some of you are under the impression that you can overpost on Facebook or even Instagram, I get that. That's why Instagram stories or Facebook stories are a great way to do that because they expire after 24 hours. So you can actually post a whole bunch of stuff to stories knowing that they won't just live there forever. Create a memorable hashtag. I know hashtags sort of seem like, 2015 and no one really does those anymore, but hashtags are a really great way to get people on board. And you can also pick a hashtag that's close to what people are experiencing right now, like, virtual events or work from home or things that people are used to seeing and engaging with. One topic that the marketing team at Community Boost let me know about, which I hadn't really thought about, was using something called micro influencers. So if you don't know what an influencer is on social media, it's basically someone who, does social media posting for a living, potentially. They have thousands and thousands of followers on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, and they use it to sell ads and things like that. But one of the great things you can do is leverage what we call micro influencers to potentially share your campaigns in front of their thousands of followers. A micro influencer they're not celebrities. You could probably call them F or E-list celebrities. These are people that might be popular in your specific area, right? A local business owner who's on TV, or a local politician, or even a local celebrity, a news anchor. People that they're used to seeing these people online or on TV or on social media. Reach out to them and ask if they wouldn't mind sharing your fundraising campaign and asking people to donate. You suddenly, if your organization only has a couple hundred followers on Instagram or Facebook, a micro influencer like a weather forecaster probably has thousands, which is crazy to think about. You suddenly get your campaign out there. The reason why micro influencers do this is because they're trying to expand their brand. And one way to do that is by sharing local nonprofits that are trying to make the world a better place. Use stories. We talked a little bit about this already. Stories, especially during and before your fundraising campaign. So a lot of questions I got around virtual events is, how do I gauge people during the event? So let's say it's a virtual event, people are attending virtually, maybe there's YouTube Live or something. Posting live on Instagram or on Facebook or doing stories all the time are a great way to make people feel like they're there. And get your audience involved to share their own stories by tagging you. The ultimate goal is user-generated content. What I mean by that is the best place to be is when people are doing the work for you. So get people to share your hashtag, to mention you on their own Facebook and Instagram. It doesn't have to be an influencer. It could just be your supporters. Next, we'll talk a little bit about Facebook and Instagram ads. Facebook and Instagram ads have hyper targeting available, which means that you can tier your supporters into very specific audiences and decide where you want to spend your budget. This is a topic I'm less familiar with, but I know the importance of Facebook and Instagram ads. I think a lot of organizations assume that ad spend is unnecessary and might be an expense that's not worth investing in, but I definitely encourage you to do your research on Facebook and Instagram ads. They're inexpensive, and they have massive reach potential, and oftentimes are much better than things like SEO ad spend or Google ad spend, but we'll talk about that too. The best way to sell tickets to a new audience is through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Video creator really wins. We talked a little bit about this already, but if you're gonna do video content on social media, make it short and add subtitles. I don't know about you, but I'm scrolling through social media. I don't really ever click into the video to listen to it, probably because I have a 15-month-old and I can't hear anything anyways. So I always try to make sure that I can just watch it. And so if you're gonna put out a video up there, subtitles are a great way to do that. Take advantage of additional viral effects. So if things are going viral right now, you wanna try to attach yourself to it by sharing hashtags, things like that. And this was a great stat that I got from a marketing friend of mine, which is Facebook and Instagram ads and other social ads like that have a 3 to 10x return on ad spend. That's, again, because it's relatively inexpensive, but the return can be pretty massive. The other thing that ad spend on social can do is that when you go and see a fundraising campaign posted to Facebook and it's already got 150, 250 likes, I'm more likely to support that campaign because I feel like it's really taking off. All right, last thing we're going to talk about is Google Ad Grants. So if you don't know about Google Ad Grants, I highly suggest you look into this. It's an extremely amazing way for organizations to get $10,000 a month in free Google search ads. Google does this for all 501c3 charities, so make sure that you look this up and potentially take advantage of it. Google Ad Grants allow you to reverse engineer what your audience is searching for and post ads exactly where they are. things to do campaigns, activities for kids, best local nonprofits. These are the things that supporters are searching for on the web right now, and they allow you to place ads where people are searching. You can also send thousands of potential supporters to your site every month by leveraging ad grants in the right way. Admittedly, Google Ad Grants is something I don't know a ton about. I do know it's been around for a little while, and there are some organizations that honestly rely heavily on ad grants, not just the $10 a month free in ad grants or in ads, but also they spend beyond that. So if it's something that you're not taking advantage of, I highly recommend you look into it and think about it. All right, we're nearing the end. Our final section is on post-campaign follow-up and building sustainable revenue. These are two really important topics that I don't think probably could be its own webinar, but a couple things on this. How you treat your supporters after your campaign is over can shape your relationship with them forever. And the experience that you put out to them and the way that you thank them both before, during, and after a campaign, we either make sure that they come back and give again, or you never hear from them again. Donor retention and donor churn is a huge issue. Most organizations retain only 30% of their donors year over year. That's crazy. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't spend the time to really communicate with supporters after the fact. The other thing we're going to talk about in this section is how to move forward, how to build more sustainable streams of revenue. So in the event something like this happens again or continues to happen, how can you have revenue coming in the door that's a little bit more sustainable than those large events or other types of fundraising that may not be available anymore? So times of crisis often present opportunities for growth. What do I mean by that? Personalized campaign follow-up will go a very long way. I mentioned this already at the beginning. We call this the golden handcuff rule, and I can't stress this enough. If you get a new supporter, a first-time donor to give during this time, where unemployment is sky high, and everybody is very careful with how and where they're spending money. If you get a new donor here, how you treat them after they support you is going to tell them everything about how much they value them as a supporter. So think about very specific communication. And it doesn't have to be one-on-one emails or phone calls. I understand that that's not scalable. But this is where segmentation of your list becomes super important. So I wouldn't send the same thank you to first-time donors as I would to repeat donors. Now, on Classy, for example, we send automatic thank yous and email receipts after every donation. I'm talking about additional follow-up after that, where you really get in and thank someone for their support, not just hand them a tax receipt. You also can find different ways to scale your outreach. One way that we see is we have an activity wall I mentioned earlier on our platform where you can digitally communicate and thank donors. They automatically get an email with that communication. You're not writing novels in these communication activity walls. You're just sending a quick thank you or an appreciatory note. These are so informal, they actually do better than emails because they really feel like someone went out of their way to thank them. Another way to scale outreach is posting names. Posting names on social media, on your website, on a newsletter makes people feel special, right? It's almost like back in high school when you're trying to get the lead in a school play. You see your name on the list, you get really excited. That's what this is about. If I support a nonprofit and suddenly my name is on their newsletter, that's cool. I like that. And that's a great way to scale personalized thank you and outreach. Next level stewardship for first-time donors is crucial. So I've talked a little bit about this already and the importance of treating first-time donors special. What are you going to do now, right? You've got new donors into the fold. They gave to you during a pandemic and a recession and a presidential election. These people are really special. How do you treat them? What do you do for them? Well, you might want to go out of your way for them for at least the first few months or year. You know, it could be swag, it could be shout outs, it could be a dedicated campaign or newsletter, something that makes them feel very exclusive. I know that if I was giving to an organization for the very first time and they went out of the way to make sure that I felt appreciated, I would probably continue to give that organization again. And then finally, what we're going to talk about on the last slide is opening the door to more sustainable giving with actionable follow-up. So all of these things that you're doing, you're not doing just to make someone feel good. All these post-campaign and event follow-up actions are built to retain donors and to build sustainable revenue. So what do I mean by that? That's what we're going to talk about next. there are two things that if I would want you to walk away from this webinar from, it's these things. Yes, we talked a lot about how to design virtual events and engage a virtual audience and market. All those things are super important. But if there's two things that I think are really important, especially as we start to move forward beyond some of these things and maybe normalize, maybe not, it actually doesn't matter. It's to make virtual fundraising and recurring giving a staple in your fundraising strategy. If these two things are not the highest priority of your fundraising strategy, I would rethink it. And here's exactly what I'm talking about. Virtual fundraising should remain a fixture in your offer to supporters. And there's a bunch of ways you can do that. If we go back to opening things up and you can have your events back and everyone can come and participate, great. Have a virtual option be there. Let people participate wherever they are. I'm from Los Angeles. I live in San Diego now. I know for some of you that's probably the same place, but I love to support nonprofits that are in my hometown, 2.5 hours away. But I'm not going to drive on the 405 in traffic and go to a 5K. But I would love to participate. And the only way I can do that is to give me a virtual option. So it's a very small thing, doesn't cost any money, takes 30 seconds to do. Every event that you do moving forward should have a virtual participation option. Make it free, make it fun, and I promise you will open the door to brand new supporters who are fundraising for you well beyond what you typically got before. You may not raise another $100,000, but even an extra 5 to 10 grand here and there, bringing in 50, 60 donors is a huge value add. The other thing you can do along those lines is if you don't end up doing events again or they're in a limited capacity, or even on top of that, you can do what we call DIY or flash fundraising. DIY fundraising is where you allow people to fundraise for anything. This is a great campaign by Operation Broken Silence, where you can start a campaign any time of the year. That's what we call flash fundraising, where you do seasonal fundraising campaigns and you allow people to get involved whenever they want. It could be awareness month campaigns. It could be end of year giving. A lot of you probably do Giving Tuesday. You can think about doing peer-to-peer fundraising for Giving Tuesday, not just asking people for donations. The other thing is the DIY format is up to you. You can do the staples, right? Birthday fundraising, fundraising on behalf of your wedding or a milestone, but you can do whatever you want, right? Do a virtual movie night. Do a something around trick-or-treating. We're all at home right now, so give your supporters different options. And finally, create a recurring giving appeal that is both transparent and exclusive. Here's what I mean by that. I've never talked to a nonprofit that doesn't want more recurring supporters. They can be the lifeblood of your organization, and they can help you survive moments like we're going through right now. But there are many organizations I work with that don't do this as effectively as they could be. What do I mean by that? If you have a donation option on your website and you have a recurring option and that's it, or people can opt in or opt out to make a recurring donation, you're not doing enough. Here's what you can do to really make your recurring campaign stand out. Make it exclusive. Give your recurring donors a name, the legacy, the family, something that makes them feel special. Secondly, make it separate from your one-time option. When people go to donate to you, there should be a recurring option and a one-time option. On that recurring option, it should be special. It should have its own messaging, its own receipting, its own thank you. And finally, once you recruit recurring donors, these are not set it and forget it supporters. Over-communicate to them, support them. We actually have a crazy stat on Classy. I think it's 35% of recurring donors come back and give another one-time gift in the same year. So do not, once you get these people in the fold, don't just move on and be like, all right, we got a recurring donor, great, we're all set. You really want to make sure that you're continuing to engage them. Maybe even you're upselling them, getting them to give more every month. It's a great way to keep them engaged. So these are the two things I think are the most important. Make virtual fundraising and recurring donations a staple of your strategy moving forward. All right, nice, right on time. Last couple things we're going to talk about are just some cool campaigns on the Classy platform from a few different nonprofits that I thought were neat. We'll just quickly take a look at them and then we'll do questions. This is a great virtual gala from Elijah Rising. Click on that for you. I really like this. It's very clean, really powerful imagery, but what I especially like about their campaign is that they really utilize video. So they talk about hope, ending sex trafficking, which is their core mission. Again, this speaks to what we talked about earlier, keeping the mission and the program front and center. They talk about their watch party, which is what they're doing to engage an audience virtually. And again, video is super common in their campaign, so I really like this one a lot. And they're also allowing people to get involved, right? Just to attend the virtual event is free, but if you want to be a sponsor, you can opt into some of these more expensive options. This is Window 9 World. This isn't a virtual event. This is actually their DIY fundraising campaign they do throughout the year. And it's pretty simple. Launch a campaign to raise funds for a cause you care about or your next trip, because they do trips on their organizations. So this is really great. You can become a fundraiser, make a donation, and then they present ideas for you. So this is what I was talking about earlier about letting fundraisers choose their own path, but prescribing some options that you know your supporters enjoy. Birthday campaigns are really common. Start your own photograph campaign, start your own yoga campaign, getting creative. They know who their supporters are, and then they present very tailored experiences for each of them. And then last one, this is Haymakers for Hope. It's a really cool organization, and they just launched this Haymakers for Hope Harriers. This is a recurring donation campaign. So their point here is that they're trying to create recurring donors. So they talk about a subscription plan where you can make a $25 a month subscription, and then you get certain things for becoming a member. This is a really good example of that exclusivity that recurring donation campaigns can have. All right. That is all I had for you today. Hopefully you found it helpful and informative. Like I mentioned, we're recording this webinar, and you'll have access to not just the webinar, but all the slides and all the links and all these slides as well that you can utilize. So let's see if there are any questions. Let's see. If you have a question, please feel free to add it in now, and I'll go ahead and do that. Yeah, I wanted to also shout out some comments too. This is from Carolyn. She wrote something about a virtual audience for a fashion show, which was the best seat in the house with good camera angles. And the key element was giving the audience a behind the scenes look at what was going on. That is such a great example of a creative way to give people exclusive access to things that they might not get in an in-person event. I love that. And she also had a question. She's trying to raise money for a local SPCA, and this is the first time she's trying to do this. Any suggestions? Anytime that you're raising money for an organization that has to do with animal welfare or something very specific, is you want to be targeted. So you don't just want to raise money for the SPCA. You want to raise money for providing cleaner kennels, or for providing food, or giving animals their forever home. You want to be as specific as you can. Yeah, I like all these suggestions. These are great. All right, I'm going to scroll down for the... Okay, cool. So here's some questions. So Marnie asked, any tips for finding new donors? So donor acquisition, tough, right? I mean, if it were super easy, then it wouldn't be, everyone would do it, I guess is the really cliche term. But there's one specific thing that I like to leverage for finding new donors. I'm going to talk a little bit about peer-to-peer fundraising. So peer-to-peer fundraising, for those unfamiliar, allows individuals to fundraise on your behalf. They create a personal fundraising page, they reach out to their own friends and family, and they raise money for you directly. The great part about peer-to-peer fundraising is that fundraisers can raise more than they can donate, so they're automatically raising more money, but they're also bringing in brand new donors to the fold. So I'll give you an example. I fundraised for this organization, Team Rubicon, which is a group of veterans that respond to disaster relief scenarios. They're based out of LA, and I created a fundraising page for them, raised about $1,100. And from that $1,100 was about 34 donors. Those 34 donors now become contacts of Team Rubicon. So one fundraiser can bring in 30 plus donors, or considerably more than that. So the major takeaway is leverage your network to reach out to their network. You don't have to rely on just your own marketing. So I think that's a great way to try to find new donors who might be more personally connected to you. So great question from Ganeda. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I have a small team, just you, which is super common, and I've hesitated taking on a virtual event because it seems overwhelming. So she asked, should I start small, or where should I begin? the best part is you want to start anywhere. It doesn't have to be big, extravagant. And I think what I would do in your position in particular is I would do a virtual campaign. You don't have to do something where people are attending, where it's, dramatic and there's galas and virtual red carpets. I think that's kind of what we all think. Just do a campaign where you're asking people for their support and doing it in a virtual way, where you allow people to both donate and fundraise, and be specific with what you're helping them fundraise for. I think that's the major takeaway there, is that it's less important to talk about what the event is about and more about what the impact means to your programs and to your community. So if your organization supports the community around you, telling supporters what it means to the community is a huge a way to do that. Sorry, I lost track of thought. So Courtney asked, any tips on engaging corporations by way of fundraising? So growing CSR programs, engaging corporations or companies in general is a huge way to get people involved. There's so many options. I think sometimes when we think about, for-profit engagement, we think about payroll deductions and things like that. It doesn't have to be that difficult. One thing that we've seen work really well is do fundraising competitions for internal departments. So for example, Class C is a for-profit company. Every year we fundraise for a different charity. Each department creates team pages and we all compete against each other, and the winner gets to go on a trip or something like that. So you could reach out to local companies. They don't have to be big, but they could be. And you could ask them, hey, would you like to fundraise for a cause? Here's what it could look like. We'd give you the resources, the tools to do it. All we'd ask is that you help us out, maybe share us on your social platforms, etc. You got to keep in mind that for-profit companies and corporations are looking for any edge that they can get. And looking good in the public is a really great way to do that. And if they can go to market telling them that they're fundraising for a local charity and they're competing for a worthy cause, it's a win-win for everybody. So peer-to-peer fundraising, in particular team fundraising, is a great way to do that. I think I saw a question I might have skipped over. James asked, any recommended tools or platforms to support with email marketing? Yeah, the two ones I suggest the most, especially if you're a smaller organization with a tighter budget, is Constant Contact or MailChimp. They're relatively inexpensive. They scale as you grow your email list, so they can start out almost free or really, really cheap, and then they grow with you. And they make segmentation and design really easy. Classy integrates with both those. And so they're great options that are affordable and simple. A higher up option would be something like a HubSpot, which is great too. A little bit more robust and likely more expensive, but if segmentation is key and you want to do things like A/B testing emails and subject lines, those types of things, it's a great platform too.
Brad, I'll read you a question from
please do. Members. Thanks, Jen.
Lucy asks that she shares that she's at a nonprofit co-working space, an empowerment hub in Queens, New York, and is it possible to incorporate campaigns into their Squarespace website?
Yeah, really good question, Lucy. And I think campaign or website integration is a common misconception that it's difficult, especially if maybe it took you a long time to build your website or you outsourced it or whatever it might be. Integrating a campaign is just including a hyperlink. So I think sometimes we feel like we have to embed things and make them overly complicated or complex. All you have to do is have a button on your website that says, become a fundraiser, make a donation, become a recurring supporter. So just hyperlink buttons that already exist on your Squarespace website, and you've automatically integrated your fundraising campaigns. Super simple.
Awesome. And there's one more question from Rick, who asks, how do you balance virtual fundraising campaigns and virtual advocacy campaigns?
Yeah, good question. I don't work a lot with advocacy campaigns, mostly in the online fundraising space, but what I typically tell organizations that ask me that, because it's pretty common, is that those are different audiences for the most part. You've got a group of people who like to volunteer their time and their energy, and you've got a group of people who want to donate money and they want to support you financially. And I think if you kind of treat those groups as two different entities, doesn't mean they don't overlap in some cases, but I think if you treat those as different entities with different marketing, different asks, different emails, I think you'll do a good job of not, over saturating either group. So I think treat them separate while giving them both options to overlap if it makes sense.
Awesome. There was a couple of questions about Google Ad Grants, and I just want to point out that Be Social Change is hosting a webinar about Google Ad Grants in November. So thanks so much for sharing a little bit more, and I encourage people to check that out.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you everybody for the questions, and thank you for the time, and Jen and the Be Social Change team for allowing me to meet with you all today. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or any other platform, and always happy to talk fundraising.
Brad, you're getting a ton of love in the chat. Just wanted you to know that people are really appreciative of the content, of the energy that you brought, and of and everything that you shared. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.